Um, Good afternoon. I want to thank you all and welcome you all. Thank you all for coming and welcome you all to our webinar today on shared leadership in action, a participatory and collaborative leadership model. I first want to lift up, we apologize for having scheduled this webinar on Rosh Hashanah and during the high holidays, but we will be making the recording available on our website within a few weeks. So all of you will receive an email alerting you when it's posted, and we hope you can share it with any and all of your colleagues who are not able to join us live today. So thank you for that. Again, apologies. Next slide. That's me. Hi, everyone. My name is Amir François. I'm a senior research associate at the Annie Casey Foundation. We are a national philanthropy with 2 hometowns here in Baltimore and also in Atlanta. And from these bases, we work across the country to ensure that all children have the future they deserve by strengthening families, building pathways to opportunity, and advancing racial and economic equity. Next slide. Sorry. It's supposed to be this slide. Everyone's really happy. Okay. Next slide. Awesome. So a couple things about the webinar today. So communicating during the webinar, we do have the chat closed actually, but we want everyone to, if a question comes to you during the course of the presentation or during the Q&A at the end, there's a Q&A window in the center of the bottom bar of your screen. Just type in questions there, we'll see them. Also use the spot to let us know if you're having any technical difficulties, because you're probably not the only one if you're having trouble with something, so we can help and troubleshoot that for you. We'll also have in our Q&A at the end, you'll be able to come off of mute and also say your question as well. Next slide. Awesome. So for today's presentation, I'm going to give a quick overview of what shared leadership is and why we're interested and commissioned this study into it in Baltimore. We're going to talk about the participating organizations that were the main way we collected data to learn about how shared leadership is working in Baltimore. Our Kirsten from Brazen is going to report out the findings. And then after that, we're going to have a conversation with some of our participating organizations that are using and implementing shared leadership in their organizations right now in Baltimore, and hear from their experiences and perspectives. And then we'll have some time for questions and discussion. Next slide. So thank you. So shared leadership in nonprofits, it's an approach where authority, decision-making, accountability are intentionally distributed across teams, staff, or even community stakeholders, rather than concentrated in a single executive director. It seeks to align leadership with the values of equity, collaboration, and hopefully responsiveness to the most that are impacted by the work. There are many benefits to shared leadership, and there are also some challenges and some growth opportunities to learn how to implement it better. My colleague, Sarah Cooper, she noticed that as she was doing her work in the Baltimore Civic site, lots of our partners, lots of the organizations we were interacting with and our grantees were starting to use more and more, we're starting to use a shared leadership model. She came to me on the research team to ask if there's a lot of research about it. And I said, no, there is some. It's a growing body of evidence, but especially not about what it means in Baltimore. So I was very excited to look into this with her. We want to not only understand it so we can know how to work with our grantees and organizations that implement this model. We also are trying to see how we as funders and philanthropy as a community can support it if organizations do feel that it's a good fit. And we also want to understand and be able to create products and supports around it um, uh, uh, for the future of shared leadership and the diversity of models of leadership and nonprofit. So again, gain deeper insight into the strengths and challenges, and learn how to be a better funding partner and support those practicing the model. Next slide, please. So we went out and uh, collaborated and commissioned Kirsten Allen from Brazen Consulting and Accounting to look into shared leadership, specifically in Baltimore and some national partners, to really start to understand what are those challenges, what are those gaps in support, and what are the benefits. So if other grantees we interact with are interested in it, we would be able to provide some evidence and some research to support that. And so I will pass it off to my colleague Kirsten Allen.
Thank you, Amir. Thank you, Sarah and the foundation. Really excited to be here today. Even more excited to bring this report, this engagement to light. Definitely to highlight the organizations that participated, because they are the ones who made this truly happen. And the engagement, the report could not have existed without them. They shared their experience and resources, and it all contributed to the final report. You can go to the next slide. These are the organizations that participated and shared their time and expertise with me, most of them being from the Baltimore region, but there were two that had a nationwide focus. You can go to the next slide. For our approach for this engagement, I utilize 3 different modes to collect data and information from the participants. Those 3 ways included organizational interviews, which allowed for me to engage with, in a group setting with all the leaders from each organization, or at least the majority of the leaders from each organization. I also utilize individual surveys that allowed for individual responses from each organizational leader. And last but not least, we did a collective group session, which was a hybrid session where we invited all the participants of this engagement to come together, and they shared their experiences, strategies, and resources in real time. Next slide. The actual report findings, as Amir highlighted, the report is now public and it can be downloaded on the foundation's website. But I'm just going to go through an overview of some highlighted themes that came up during the findings. What is shared leadership? That was pretty much the first question that I asked across all leaders in our group sessions, in our group interviews, but I also asked them individually in the surveys that each one of them completed. A pretty standard definition is a collaborative and participatory leadership model distributing roles across multiple individuals. Specifically highlighting some bullet points that were pulled directly from the participants include operating on thought partnership, shared power and trust, emphasizing equal responsibility, diverse representation and shared vision, supporting work-life balance, sustainability, and the prevention of burnout, and ultimately being defined by the team implementing it. I do want to highlight that one of the most profound things for me that I found, in my opinion, was the impact and the framework it had on work-life balance and just overall wellness. When you typically think of metrics of success, you may think about the increase of funding happening or the increase of enrollment or participation, but what about the decrease of blood pressure or the ability to take family leave? Those were some of like the success metrics in my opinion, that really jumped out that we don't ordinarily think about. You can go to the next slide. Core values and assumptions. There were many assumptions made throughout the engagement. Each organization, like the definition of shared leadership, had their own assumptions. Some include decentralized leadership, just not solely at the top, but also just across the organization in general. High alignment across diverse leadership perspectives. It was best when co-defined with the people involved. So just like the shared leadership definition, majority of the time that was defined within the organization and what it meant to that organization and the values that they were upholding. It often emerges out of need, sometimes succession planning, burnout, board recommendations. In some organizations, everybody's journey was different. Some started at the inception of creating the organization, and some evolved into the framework over time. Next slide. Key benefits of the model. There are many benefits that were highlighted while speaking with the various participating organizations. Some of them are highlighted here to include diverse perspectives that lead to better decision-making, improve support systems that reduce leadership isolation and pressure. I can't emphasize that one as well. That was one of the points that was highlighted across many of the organizations, was just the reduction of feeling the burden of having to make decisions in isolation. Increased trust and collaboration rooted in shared values and commitment. Flexible leadership structures that can adapt to evolving needs. And again, I just highlighted this in the previous slide, but the enhanced work-life balance and improved physical and mental health. It was one of the points that was also just drove in on a number of different occasions across different organizations, of just the difference in how they were able to show up at work, how they were able to show up in their own personal lives and with their families. Next slide, please. No framework is without challenge, and this is no shared leadership is no exception. It does come with some challenges. And some of the ones that were highlighted by the organizations that participated, included role clarity. Unclear distinctions can cause confusion. This confusion doesn't just rest at the top with leadership. This confusion can also trickle down into your staff and supporting members if there isn't enough alignment and role clarity stated. Communication, which requires strong and ongoing coordination across leadership and staff. Can't say enough how important communication is and finding the best methods that work for each organization. External perceptions. Stakeholders and funders may need education on the model. And funding. Justifying multiple leaders can be challenging. Many organizations share challenges they face with funders, from grant applications to just funding justifications, especially when you have multiple leaders and your bottom line or your overhead is heavier than the typical hierarchy or model. Next slide. Decision-making practice was also a big element that came up during the sessions. Another key theme, it was very nuanced. And again, it was just based in each organization's practice. Everyone has a different approach. Some decided to utilize collaboration or consensus-based or just mutual respect when making decisions. It definitely requires some trust-based conflict resolution mechanisms. All the decisions reflect the organization's value and commitment to equity, or I think at least there was a very intentional approach to make sure that the decisions made reflected the values of the organization. And there are also varied levels of structures to address, from practices to team charters. So each organization, like every other theme I've highlighted, everyone takes their own approach and fits that approach to work for their organization. Some are very structured in their approach as far as decision making, utilizing frameworks or charters. and some just take it on a case-by-case basis and pretty much utilize consensus and talking it out to make decisions. Next slide. External relations and ecosystem alignment. The following aspects became important elements for organizations to name. They are the learnings and observations that can shift perspectives of the model and external engagement. Stakeholder education is a big one. It's definitely critical. Like funders, the concept of shared leadership may be new to each organization's audience, that can include donors, partners, board members, and communication and education are essential for the organization's sustainability. Funders may require reorientation to understand shared leadership models. This is not a typical model, as we've stated. So there are learnings, there are various nuances that funders are learning in real time, and how funders, specifically probably program managers, are figuring out in real time how to best approach shared leadership models. Funders can make subtle shifts to ensure an equitable grant making process for shared leader models. So one of the recommendations that you'll find in the report is something as simple as a funder shifting or amending their grant application to include a space for more than one leader to be present or more than one contact person to be present. A lot of times it's just a one person, but when you're utilizing a shared leadership model, depending on the organization's approach and how they disperse roles and responsibilities, there may be a need for more than one person to be listed on the application and communication to be had. Also, shared leadership affects external communication strategies, um, especially when you're talking about different stakeholders and audiences. I encourage everyone to read the report for additional context and the recommendations that were provided. It definitely will give you better insight into the process and the findings that came from the experiences and resources of each organization. Next slide. And the part that I'm most happy about, introducing the organizations, at least two of the organizations that supported this engagement and bringing some of these findings to light. The first one being, you can go to the next slide. The first one being the Shriver Center at University of Maryland, Baltimore County, where their two leaders, Eric Ford and Joby Taylor, have begun to implement a shared leadership model in a very unique framework, but I will let them introduce themselves further and say a little bit more about their organization.
Are we on? Can you hear me? There we are.
Yeah, you're here.
Let's see, Eric. There we go. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks to Annie Casey Foundation and Kirsten for calling us to participate in this research and then pulling together such a helpful report to be helpful to our work. So I'm Joby Taylor, and along with Eric, one of the co-leaders of the Shriver Center at UMBC. Eric, you want to give a quick intro and then we'll jump in?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining on this webinar on shared leadership. We're happy to share our experiences. My name is Eric Ford, Executive Director for Public Service Programs as a part of the Shriver Center at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County.
Eric and I are a little over 2 years into our shared leadership journey, implementation at UMBC. And as we participated in this group, we were the unique higher education model as part of the study. So, many universities even at UMBC, we still have the traditional kind of pyramid model across the institution, and really felt it was really leadership's openness to us implementing kind of a flattened top at the Shriver Center was something we have leaned into for a couple years. We had a generational opportunity at UMBC when our 30-year president, Freeman Hrabowski, retired, and at the same time, our longtime director of the Shriver Center, Michelle Wolf, retired. And we had leadership transformations across the institution, and it was a moment really to think, well, will we fill a vacant position, or can we step back and kind of consider what structure might fit the moment we're in, as well as the values and mission that we have as a Shriver Center. We are the primary bridge between a campus and community as the Center for Community Engagement and Public Service at UMBC. We fortunately have a new president and leadership, Valerie Shears-Ashby, who has really leaned in to continuing our institution's deep values of service and engagement, as well as inclusive excellence. So that was part of the moment, as well as a Shriver Center, Sergeant Eunice Shriver, we had this legacy of creating pathways for service and engagement that Shriver's, launched the Peace Corps and Vista, as well as Special Olympics and other programs. So we were really already rooted in a legacy of leadership as a social practice more than a position, and that kind of tradition of everyone can lead because everyone can serve. How can we kind of develop the roles that model that legacy and those values as we move into our own mission of community engagement and service? Eric will say more about that. I thought I'd just quickly say on the benefits and challenges, which we've experienced both. Communications and roles clarity is a work in progress, and probably will always be. We have been mostly approaching that relationally through our regular one-on-one reporting line staff meetings and our regular meeting structures, and are kind of increasingly trying to adopt if you don't know, just ask us, to try to diffuse confusions and things, and create the opportunity for just reaching out, making that as easy as we can. But that is a work in progress. On another level, just to pause and think about conflict potential, in kind of my primary lead area, we had a period of pretty extended and intense challenge recently with some program challenges, and I could listen and advise and participate in that process of decision making, but in that moment could also in certain key moments say, let me bring this to Eric, who has kind of a complementary and different set of experiences and skills. And the challenge can be when it slows processes down to take that extra step, but the benefit really is a kind of the diversity of experience and expertise matters, and you kind of end up with kind of a better together model. So that has been in challenging times, that's also proven to be a real benefit. If we have kind of aligned mission and values, then you can really draw upon the diversity of experience. I'll hand it off to my co-leader, Eric, to offer some thoughts here.
Thanks so much, Joby. So yes, implementing a co-leadership model in higher ed can be challenging. However, our very intentional approach helped us tremendously. We leaned into mission, vision, values, and most importantly, community voice. So one of the programs of the Shriver Center is a choice program. It's a mentoring and advocacy program for systems-involved youth. And in response to the Baltimore uprising in 2015, we looked for equity-based frameworks to better prepare our staff and AmeriCorps members to serve youth and their families in the community. So at that time, we partnered with the American Association of Colleges and Universities, AAC&U for short, to launch the Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Campus Center. or TRHT for short. So we were one of the first 10 campuses nationwide to embrace this framework. And we quickly found out that so even though choice sits within the Shriver Center, that we needed to fully engage the Shriver Center and the broader campus to launch this campus center. So this decision on kind of leaning into equity more intentionally was also informed by being a grantee of the Annie E. Casey Foundation at the time and participating in their Race, Equity, and Inclusion, or REI, in the workforce community of practice. And one of the fundamental questions posed by the technical assistant in that REI work, which was the Associated Black Charities, was how does an equity lens manifest in day-to-day operational functions, organizational and programmatic functions within the larger cultural context of your organization? So we really tried to lean into that question. And we leveraged this key funding partnership of Annie E. Casey to advocate for change on campus. So when you look at the Shriver Center's mission, it's, lead meaningful social change through transformational higher education and community partnerships. And we feel like we model this through co-leadership. The Shriver Center sits within the Division of Professional Studies. And DPS stated goals are partnership-based, the use of creative collaboration, being good stewards of partnerships. And Joey and I feel that co-leadership was the most effective way to remain good stewards of our many partnerships that we have. DPS also has the values of collaboration and inclusiveness, and being future focused. And, we strongly feel that our motto lives by and we personify this value of being future focused. UMBC's mission, our UMBC community redefines excellence in education through inclusive culture and connects innovative teaching and learning research across disciplines and civic engagement. We see shared leadership as fulfilling this vision of UMBC, or for UMBC. So our TRHT model was lifted up again on campus during the triple pandemics of 2020, of COVID, social justice, and the economy, when communities took to the streets and demanded change. We rooted our co-leadership model in UMBC's and departmental visions, values, and likewise, we see our model as a response to the community calling for more equity. So when we talk about the why, when we explain our model, we attempt to get buy-in on campus, we leverage these statements and demonstrate how it is aligned with what was already being articulated in our campus, departmental missions and visions. And because we grounded our co-leadership model in this way, our transition on campus has been relatively smooth. So out in there, just to kind of sum it up, is that, we leaned into our existing mission statements, vision statements, and community voice. And it's been a fairly smooth process. Thanks.
I appreciate that, Eric and Joby. They're not going anywhere. Just want to give some space to introduce the next organization, but they will be back for Q&A. You can go to the next slide. One of our other organizations that graciously participated in this engagement was Code in the Schools, and they are represented by their 3-leader co-leadership, including Andrew Pham, Diane Conley, and Stephanie Alfie. I am honored to introduce them and bring them into this space. So I will let them talk a little bit more about themselves, their experience, and their organization.
Thank you so much, Kirsten, and thank you again to Annie E. Casey for doing this study and for just everything you do to support the community and nonprofit ecosystem in Baltimore. I'm Diane Conley. I'm one of, a trio of co-executive directors at Code in the Schools. Just real quick as an introduction to Code in the Schools, we've been around since 2013. Our mission is to empower young people across the city with access to computer science education in order to bridge the gap between education and careers in higher education and eliminate structural inequities in the tech industry and higher education. We do that in a couple of different ways. Over the years, we have reached tens of thousands of young people through our partnership with city schools. We also partner with lots of community organizations and provide our own direct service programs to young people through after school and summer youth works programs. We, in addition, do professional learning in the Mid-Atlantic region to help educators upskill and be able to have impact in their schools and communities. We moved our executive director, founding executive director, retired a little more than 2 years ago. And at that time, we moved to a co-leadership model. I had been in the organization, and our board at that time brought in Andrew and Stephanie. So I will let Andrew speak next.
Thanks so much, Diane. So first and foremost, thank you so much for having us here. It is great to be in community with other co-leaders. I think that was one of the biggest things when we embarked on this journey, and because that's what it is. Who else is doing this work? How does it work for them? And I think what I really want to emphasize as my key takeaways from this work and the report, for all the benefits that have been outlined, the lack of isolation, the better decision making, the work-life balance, there's also responsibilities to tend to that co-leadership relationship. And that looks like shared agreements, building trust, decision-making protocols, all of these things that no one gives you. That is the work of co-leadership. And it's taken us 2 years to get to different points in all of that work, but it is work well worth it. And I think that's one thing that you should take into consideration. Like, don't just look at the benefits, look and save space for the time to do the work to actually make co-leadership work. And I'll hand it off to our last co-executive director, Stephanie.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for having us. And as echoes my co-leader said, it's great to be in community with other folks that are also trying to figure it out, you know? So in the just over 2 years that we've been a co-executive director team, it's been an interesting, exciting challenge to really figure out how to make a model work for our organization, the work that we do. You know, we're still trying to figure out how do we present ourselves as a multiracial, multi-gendered, multi-generational team that serves a multi-generational, multi-gendered, very diverse community of students, educators, and systems that we serve. So, excited to kind of continue to be in conversation, continue to do the work to determine how to make this model really work. And the thing that I really appreciate about this report is not just highlighting the challenges, not just highlighting the successes, but really using it as a tool to determine how can you make co-leadership work for you, right? As leaders of the organization, we have a responsibility to fulfill our mission, but the how in which we do that is where the creativity comes in. The how that we meet the moment, how do we meet the needs of the constituents that we serve is where we get to kind of flex that muscle of how do we look to new and different ways of doing the work. So with this report, for folks that are on this call that I'm assuming are interested in exploring this co-leadership model to see if it works for you all, really think about what was presented in the report as far as the successes, the challenges, the modalities, the structure, to go into a new model really with success in mind. What success looks like in mind, right? What is it that you all are trying to accomplish through co-leadership? Is it the diversifying leadership pathways? How do you then implement that throughout the organization, not just at the top, but through the organization to make sure that diverse leaders have access to leadership opportunities? If it's, creating increased capacity, how do you measure that, right? How are you going to determine what kind of capacities, what type of work you want to see on what type of work you want to see your organization accomplish on the other side. What are the outcomes? Just as we look at our work, what are the outcomes of how we're trying to meet our mission? Really understanding, and taking the things that we presented in this report to determine what success looks like for you all. How does this model work to achieve your mission? How is it going to work to serve your people? Is definitely a piece of the puzzle to determine on the onset of exploring co-leadership. That's definitely the one of the major takeaways. I want to make sure that the folks interested in this model, interested in exploring it, wanting to know how it helps your organization to really be strong in what you want to come out of it, whether it's a couple of leaders internal to the organizations that are embarking on co-leadership, or if it's coming from a board decision. Really making sure that you, as members of participating in the model or stakeholders, have a strong understanding of what does it look like on the other side. How do we know we're successful when we're implementing this model?
I appreciate everyone's thoughtful response. Definitely want to thank you, Stephanie, for providing that perspective because, this report, although it does give some great insight. I really think it's still very high level and just really scratches the surface. And bringing this community together and, hopefully growing it over time, just organically or even intentionally manifesting that. Will help to develop and provide resources because a lot of organizations are doing it on the cuff. It is a very iterative model, and it's not just what it is when you first begin. How many times have you all changed your approach? How many times have you all, created these different nuances of different things just based on where you are in the moment and where you are in time? So, like I said, this report, I believe, is still very high level. I think it just scratches the surface of shared leadership framework, and I'm just excited to see the continued learnings and continued growth of organizations that are looking to step into this space. Next slide. This is where we are going to transition to our question and discussion time. I am going to throw it back to Amir to facilitate this section, but this will be a great time for you to put your questions, audience, in the Q&A because we have all these amazing leaders with all this experience just waiting to give you answers to your questions. So please take a moment, put some questions in the Q&A, and we will have our leaders and other panelists join in and answering some of these questions.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again, everyone, for sharing and Kirsten leading us through the work of the report and all the insights it lifts up, and then for showing that in action. And can we also actually, it'll be a lot because it's shared leaders. Can we spotlight the Shrivers as well? So we have a couple questions so far, but please keep them coming. So the first one, and gonna just jump right into there. Does co-leadership or shared leadership depress director salaries? So thinking if you have the salary or the structure for one leader and then you chop that into two or three, is that how it works, or is it more complicated? So I'll let anyone jump in as a answer for that one.
I'll jump in. I think in our organization, we had, prior to co-leadership, I was working very closely with our executive director in a COO type role. So we were already close to being co-leaders. And we had gaps in our organization. So rather than, and I'll add, we're not paid even at our level a whole lot of money relative to what you might think ideally we would be paid. But and this kind of ties into Micaiah, I'm not sure if that's how you say your name, question. We each come from very complementary but different backgrounds. So we were able, through bringing the strengths of, for example, Stephanie has deep expertise in youth programs. Andrew has deep expertise in academics and instruction. My background is in the tech industry and running businesses and operations and finance. So we were able, in bringing them in, to kind of overlap with folks in the at the next level down of our organization and really eliminate some gaps that we had. And we have a much flatter organization as a result.
Eric, I don't know if you have any, we're nested within a university, a much larger institutional context. But I would say the way that it kind of emerged in our case, Eric and I were both in existing positions that through reclassifying them, restructuring, there was some expanded cost, but we used kind of savings from that co-leadership model to create new staff roles to increase the broader capacity of the organization. So I would say, in some sense, the institution had to invest in the model, but not it's not like a two for one, we didn't double the cost or something. We kind of created an expanded staffing model and absorbed roles within that that allowed us to restructure. So that might be more often the case in a reorganizational model than in a pure startup or something.
You, Jovi and Diane. I will say Diane also started answering partly Micaiah's question, which was our second question. So why not split up responsibilities based on strengths of each leader? Does this model that each co-leader needs to have both a similar and diverse skill set? So having both, and what impact has co-leaders had on their direct service staff, considering this is an unusual model? So I think we hit on earlier parts, but that last part, what impact has it had on the rest of the staff of the organization? Yeah, I'd love it if anyone wants to.
Yeah. I wanted to expand upon this a little bit and talk about the thing that really excited me about coming onto a co-leadership model is the ability to learn amongst my co-leaders, right? So they were definitely things that you're going to normally go into. I'm, a programmatic person. I really lean into the programs, but this model really gave me, I'm coming into my first, early in my executive leadership career, gave me a chance to go, okay, how do I take on the finances? How do we kind of start to understand what it takes on, what it means to really expand and lead an entire organization. So that culture of learning trickles down, right? So we're able to, across our lines of business, go, okay, how do we coach our team to, how do we coach our team members? How do we coach each other? So it really does allow us to have this culture of learning, of developing, of coaching one another, coaching, vertically, horizontally. So that is something that is really, I guess, exciting. And depending on how you establish your model, I would really strongly emphasize and, bringing that into it, that, hey, everyone has their realm of expertise, your subject matter in this. But in co-leadership and diffusing decision-making and diffusing some of these other hierarchical structures, you're able to learn more and dig into, okay, how do I expand into roles and positions that I might not be as comfortable in, right? How do we start to take on the shared responsibility of the work and learn through that? And it also kind of also speaks to, I think, something that Jovi mentioned, right? How do you have those conversations? Like, if you don't know, ask, right? So we're all here to learn. We're all here to ask questions and figure it out together. And that's something that we're able to do because we're a little bit flatter as an organization now. So that's really the thing that starts to trickle down, is how do we start to coach? How do we lean into the places that are our expertise, but then also how do we diffuse that across lines of businesses and bodies of work?
Definitely. And there's I'm gonna kind of put two together. So Micaiah had a follow-up, but also Lynette had a question that I think goes with it. So Micaiah's follow-up was sounds like co-leaders can take on much broader responsibilities to help carry the org versus or the mid-level managers to do work. And then Lynette said, or how can organizations stay nimble and also involve more leaders in the decision-making process? So while you, I guess, have more co-leaders, it sounds like you're creating cultures where kind of everyone is taking on more ownership too. And does that get confusing or messy, or it's are there structures in place? I would just broaden the question a bit.
So I can jump in and so the way Joby and I have approached is that we have the Shriver leadership team that is, kind of just that lead the programs that we oversee. And we try to, as much as possible, um, vet ideas, concepts, needs, past them to inform our decisions. So if there's a key decision that needs to be made, we'll go to the tribal leadership team and say, here's here, here's what's going on. What do you guys think? What feedback do you have? What input do you have? And then Joby and I will come back and discuss that a little bit further and decide on a course of action. But I do think quite naturally through that process that we are potentially developing the next, co-leaders that could come behind us to fill fill the positions as we move on. So we lead on the leaders that are leading their programs a lot in decision making and try to empower them and lift their voice whenever we can.
Yeah, that's true, Eric. We really, that'll always be a work in progress too, but trying to extend it out farther. And I find myself this phrase, think slow, think slow there, particularly in complex and difficult decisions or processes, like how can we slow it down? And I think sharing, having those ripple out conversations and relational approach helps us slow it down. And I can hear my dad saying, measure twice and cut once. So there is kind of an efficiency, I think, built into slowing down and sharing if it results in more higher consensus or more informed and inclusive decisions.
Thank you for that answer. I have a question for, and I guess it's for everyone, but definitely for the author of the report, Kirsten. Did any of your research uncover differences in adopting shared leadership in organizations that have more male or female leaders? So looking at whether they're seeing we have a very diverse assortment of leaders here, but did you see any patterns of organizations that are more in your small sample size, albeit patterns of gender or age, or was it kind of all over the place?
I would have to say it's all over the place. At least in the sample size wasn't that large. It was very geographic focused. However, I can't say that I saw any particular patterns as far as gender, generation. I mean, every organization had a different configuration. Um, in their leadership, whether it was 2 leaders or 3 leaders. I think 3 was the most leaders that we had of organizations that were participating. It could be 2 women, 1 male, just like here. I know that at the time, Burns Institute, where they were 2 males, 1 female. So it really just depended on the organization. One thing I will say is that one of the organizations, their inception to a shared leadership model was based on succession planning. And part of it had a generational approach. So there was a retiring executive director, another member of the organization that was looking to, matriculate into that role, into that space. And she was much younger than the person coming out of that role. And that person, is still probably going to serve as some type of mentor or, still have some hands-on with the organization, but was really just looking for a place and a framework to be able to transition this person in slowly. And I think their overall hope is that it can continue to be a model so that there is always someone there that is knowledgeable on various different levels to take over those roles and responsibilities. So long story short, to answer, I didn't see any real common threads.
Thanks, Kirsten. Do have a question. Someone is creating a new organization and assembling an advisory board to help develop its shared leadership model. Very exciting. What are the most important considerations when implementing this in the development of a new organization? So if you could do it from the beginning, which kind of both of you did in transition, but from the ground up, any advice or things that they should be lifting up and thinking about?
I'll jump in and I'll just say definitely complementary skill set. So, Joby and I have a very complementary skill set where he is, heavy on the curriculum, academic, the scholar side, and I am, focused on public service, statewide initiatives. I have some experience in facilities, and, personnel and staffing. So, it was just a match made in heaven for lack of a better term. We really do have complementary skills, but I think that is the key, is that the skill sets of the two people are different but complement each other. And then there also has to be a tremendous amount of trust between the two people. I'll put those two up.
Is there anyone else?
Yeah, I'll add to that. The trust piece, it can't be overestimated in my thinking. And it's taken us, just because Andrew, Stephanie, and I never worked together before they came into the organization as co-leaders. It took us, a long time to just develop basic trust as coworkers and colleagues, just because we didn't know each other. So I think that there is an amount of time you need to just acknowledge will need to happen if you're bringing people together who don't have a history of working with each other.
No, that is really helpful. And no, time. That's a resource that you should build in if you're doing that, definitely. We have some other questions, but I do just want to take liberty as the moderator to answer one final question is, what can funders and governments and organizations do that work with you all and partner with you to make it a little easier to be a shared leader, something that we just don't get no matter how often you tell us, or something, a question you wish we were asking more to you?
I'm happy to just say quickly, there's a lot of question about, do you have 3 people doing one person's job, or, the questions from funders. And I think folks would do well to reflect on why this has emerged as a model. And, I think in our case, the job of a single executive director, it just wasn't sustainable, no matter how much you might be willing to pay someone. And, it just wasn't no single person had the capacity to really do that work. So it's finding a way to make things work and have the impact we want to have. It's not like, oh, this was just a kind of nice thing to do for our organization, so we could all, put our feet up a little bit, which we're still not doing, although someday we will.
I think the big, oh, go for it.
Go right ahead, Andrew, please.
I think one of the biggest things a funder could ask is, what could you do now that you haven't been able to do before? And I think for our answer, it's yes, we are doing more. We're getting into the nitty gritty, but we're also up in the strategic. We're connecting programs and services in ways that haven't been done before and finding some efficiencies. So yes, if you were to model things in a traditional organizational chart, it's going to look a little top heavy, but I really want you to look at our results. How are things connected? How are we able to do more with the resources we have and grow? So that's what I wish our funders would say, like, what are you doing now? How has this changed? And what are the ways that you measure that?
I was just going to add from participating in this kind of pilot research study. In some ways, we're kind of just contributing into a kind of some sense of larger understanding, but it also kind of had a feel of like a mix between a community of practice opportunity and a training opportunity. So I would say, as something that's still emerging, if the benefit of participating in this limited study was to feel like got a chance, at least in a limited way, to connect with people who were, experimenting in similar ways, and then got a chance to even receive a report that was partially of our own making, that kind of reflected back some understanding. So I would say that, in terms of those supports, structures for ongoing kind of community conversations and community practice, as well as whatever those emerging resources are that support training and development in the emerging model. Those will help kind of move forward.
Well, thank you, Joby. Bringing it back to community. We love that at the Casey Foundation. So thank you. It's always about community. Again, questions about how long it takes you to make decisions, all these flat structure guarding against clicks and decision making in the org. So as Kirsten said, we've only scratched the surface. So thank you for helping us do that. So I want to definitely thank my panelists for joining us today and sharing your insights and perspective and experience. And thank you so much, Kirsten, for this wonderful report that is getting us more information about shared leadership. Also want to thank the meeting and events team, Dionisa and our strategic communications, and for supporting this. Thank you all, and look for a recording soon. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.